Let's go.
You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
Let's go.
Welcome to the podcast. You're back again. Thank you. I'm going to jump right in with my guest, Iain Thomas, who's the Group Creative Director at Virtue. He is a man of many things. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to try to do this right, Iain. Let me see how I do. He is an AI evangelist and the author of numerous books and creative projects. He's worked with some of the biggest companies and institutions to bring their ideas to life. One idea or one area is Coca-Cola NFT, one of the most successful branded NFTs ever made. That's non-fungible tokens for those of you paying attention. He continues to work on projects focused on Web 3.0, the Metaverse, and innovative opportunities. And he is an international #1 best-selling creator, new media artist, and has recently announced the publication of his book, which is What Makes Us Human. He explores human spirituality using the evolving technology of artificial intelligence. He's written this in collaboration with a language model that uses deep learning to produce human texts. So he's the first author that I know of that has been working with AI to author the book. So welcome, Iain. Thank you for being here. Let me first say that, look, I see a lot of common themes here, kind of like I outlined, but man, that's a lot of interest. What is your brand within all of this? What is the thread that pulls everything together?
It's honestly one of the biggest struggles of my life is kind of choosing the one thing. And it's really frustrating because I do it for clients all the time where I have to sit with them and go, these are all the things you could be, but you need to condense yourself down and represent one thing, to the market or to the public. And I am terrible at it. I end up doing so many different weird and wonderful creative things that I find it incredibly creatively satisfying. But it can be a little bit schizophrenic or discombobulating. But if I had to choose something, for me, it's very much this kind of meeting place of creativity and the humanities and technology, and what technology can enable. When I was very young, I grew up in a place called Port Elizabeth on the tip of South Africa. And I grew up in one of the first households to have some kind of internet access back then in the 90s, bulletin board services as they were back in the day. And I was very lucky to be exposed to all of this. And I was always fascinated by the power of technology to connect people, which I think is lost on younger generations. I think, the internet is this ubiquitous thing. But, it was this powerful, magical thing for me. And so I've always kind of kept that magic, as an almost spiritual, creative thing where I've come back to it again and again to explore it in all these weird and wonderful different ways.
Creativity and humanities connecting people with technology. How was that?
Yeah.
Pretty good?
Yeah. There you go. I can't.
Look, you could also, with that voice and accent, you could also be a radio announcer. You could add that to the list, I think.
Well, if all this doesn't work out, there's always that.
I outlined kind of your experience, et cetera, but I'd like to hear it from you. Could you level set us a bit more in terms of where you've been, what brought you here, what's your experience?
I'll do my best. So I mentioned that I grew up in Port Elizabeth in South Africa.
Yep.
And I was very lucky to have, or to still have, a brother who is quite different to me. He's very technologically minded, very process driven, very granular. I'm very abstract and philosophical. I can tell jokes. He can't. But he's also very good with numbers and can remember phone numbers and things like that, which I can't do. He actually ended up getting arrested by Interpol at the age of 16 for hacking into Belgium's telephone network. And so I was very much, within the space with a group of hackers and, as they were called back then, freakers, who would mess around with phone lines and do all these weird and wonderful things. And so, like I said, like that exposure earlier on to a very creative person kind of left me with this fascination with technology. And that's, come through again and again in all these different ways. One of the really big ways is with the rise of, blogging and social media in the 2000s, I started a poetry and photography blog, which was kind of unheard of at the time because a lot of blogs were about soccer or cooking recipes. And I created this multimedia experiment called I Wrote This For You, which was centered around the pronoun you. And I wrote these short stories, these poems combined with these photographs that this photographer from Japan would send me once a day. And we've never met. We've been doing that since around 2007. And eventually it became insanely popular, and it became one of the best-selling collections of poetry ever published when it was eventually published. And so that, kind of creative side of my life paralleled a marketing, advertising side of my life, because that's always great to pay the bills and to be creatively fulfilled. And at the same time, I've, won a whole bunch of awards, done a whole bunch of, fascinating things for everyone from Nike to Coca-Cola to, pretty much everyone in between. And a few years ago, not even a few years ago, probably about 2 years ago, I got really into GPT-3 as an artificial intelligence. For a long time, I kind of theorized that copywriting could be automated. I could see how I'd been doing it as a creative person, and how, the younger copywriters that I briefed would do it. There would be these similar kinds of processes, these similar kinds of patterns. And so one day I saw on Product Hunt that someone had released something called copysmith.ai, which was a GPT-3 driven copywriting platform. And so I looked at this and I was like, this is exactly what I believe could happen. And so without any introduction, I tracked down the founder, who was this wonderful woman in her early 20s in Canada. And I managed to video call her while she was eating breakfast the one morning and say, I don't care how I'm involved with this, but I have to be involved with this in some way, shape, or form, because I think this is the future. And she was just glad to have someone involved, who had a large background in marketing and copywriting and, all of those different things. And so for months, I worked with them to go, this is how I come up with an idea for an ad. This is how I write a headline. This is how I write a tagline. And it's mind-blowing in terms of how good it is. I honestly, I can't overstate enough how impactful I think AI is going to be on the creative arts over the next few years. And it was honestly like seeing aliens or angels in terms of how profound, GPT-3 is at mimicking, these supposedly fundamentally human arts. At some point, myself and Jasmine Wang, the co-founder, decided to write a book together. I'd come up with this idea called What Makes Us Human. And that's coming out in November. And I realized, as much as I could train GPT-3 to come up with ad ideas or headlines or all these different things, I could train it on pretty much anything. So I trained it on the poetry of Rumi, the Bible, the Tao Te Ching, the lyrics of Leonard Cohen, anything and everything that I could find that was profoundly spiritual and moving and inspirational. And I put it all together. And I had a conversation with the resulting intelligence. And the book is the record of that conversation. So I asked it, why do we suffer? Or how do we, overcome the death of a loved one? Or what is the meaning of life? And its responses are beautiful, and poetic and poignant and original, So, and at the same time as I'm doing that, I am a group creative director at Virtue, like I said, where I'm also the global creative director of Coca-Cola within the agency. And we do a lot of metaverse work for them. And I don't know, my work and my art and everything kind of speaks to each other, and I jump around. So I'm terrible at nutshells. And I realized that was incredibly
No, that was pretty good though, man. Now it's
meandering.
so many things I need to unpack. I'm like, where
I
do I
know. I'm
begin
sorry.
with this?
I'm
No,
sorry.
all good. First of all, how's your brother doing? Is he is he free?
he works for a bank in quant trading, so he does fine. He's doing very well for himself.
How did the Interpol thing shape out?
He was underage,
Yeah.
and there wasn't actually a law against what he was doing. If you remember in the 80s, in the 90s, when freakers and hackers were getting caught over here in the US, they were getting charged under wire fraud laws because that was the closest thing they had, at that point
Yeah.
legally to go after them with. We had nothing like that in South Africa, so they knew what he was doing was illegal. They had no way of locally prosecuting him, and he was underage. He was 16 years old at the time. I was 14. So they confiscated his computer, and after a lengthy process, he got it back. But yeah, those were some really fascinating and fun times.
I
And he's fine.
actually in there's a gentleman in my high school that uh, I don't, for lack of a better term, he was breaking into different systems and whatnot. And same scenario, one of the companies that he broke into ended up hiring him.
Yeah. What I find really fascinating is, back then it truly was the Wild West of the internet in terms of, there just being no regulations, no barriers, no nothing. It was just bulletin board services and modems. And even, the traditional web that came after that was still, crazy in terms of
Mhm.
what was out there without these like, kind of centralized platforms that we have today, which are the kind of hangover from Web 2. That Wild West energy that I felt then, I feel today in artificial intelligence. If I look at, the kind of AI that I look at, which is like GPT-3, which is, DALI, which is also made by OpenAI, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, all these different creative platforms that are just popping up, week by week. It's that similar kind of energy, in terms of it just being the absolute Wild West where everything is and anything seems to be possible.
There's so many things to break down. You're probably gonna have to lead me a little bit here. I,
Sure.
I often think that I'm pretty well in front of technology, but two things scare me. One is
Hmm.
I've outsourced my home IT to my wife, which is very embarrassing.
don't you don't
And
you work for
now,
IBM?
yes, I do. Yeah, but she does all the routers and everything, and now it's very embarrassing for me to go, "Hey, the internet's down. What the hell's going on?" And the second thing is, I read your bio and I'm looking at NFTs, Web 3.0, and I'm thinking, oh man, this is going to be interesting. But I think I might be out in front. But given comparatively to you, I don't think that's even close to the case. I see a lot of topics here, and I'm going to break it down. You tell me if one I miss, or one you want to remove, or one you want to add. I see AI just in general, NFTs, Web 3.0 in the metaverse. The book, I want to break that down as well on human spirituality. I presume you got to be a crypto guy as well. You a crypto guy?
I have to be for the sake of our clients. I'll drop in on that for a minute. The thing that I always say at work is that we have to be responsibly excited about the technology, because I think that within that space there's a lot of snake oil. I think there's a lot of criticism that's very well deserved of the space. Um, but I think the problem is that there's the very real potential that we throw the baby out with the bathwater, where there's some really fascinating stuff going on with new forms of ownership. We know young people are really fascinated by that, whether that's in a video game and that's a skin, or it's a Bored Ape Yacht Club or a CryptoPunk or whatever else it is.
Mm-hmm.
There's something there, and I see it in a similar kind of way, going back to that era again of the first web, where you had, that massive bubble that burst, but out of that bubble, came these massive platforms that have had these profound effects on society in terms of how we live and work and navigate the world, from Google to Amazon and so on. So I think, the crypto bubble has burst, but I think that there's some really fascinating utility and, things that are really, really interesting, that still exist within the space.
So, are you an investor then? Are you willing to say
Slightly.
slightly?
I have
So
some
you just
exposure.
believe you think the technology has a lot to offer one way or another. If
I know this much is true. I know young people especially are fascinated by new forms of ownership. I think that previous generations, millennials in particular, we've kind of rented our lives, whether it's Netflix or Audible or whatever it is. We've kind of just come to accept, like, we're going to rent these different things. And what we've seen is young people want to own things. They want to own things in different ways. They want their avatars within video games to own things. They want, their NFTs to be able to give them access, to concerts or to experiences or to clothing. If you look at what, Nike and their Web3 studio Artifact are doing, we know that for a fact, and so building things around that and satisfying those desires and is is working out, and it's paying off in spades. I think, like, you brought up in the intro the first NFT we did for Coca-Cola, which was for Friendship Day, which was the world's first openable NFT. We created this, beautiful fridge that you could open, and inside it was a digital wearable you could wear into Decentraland, which is a metaverse blockchain-driven game. We minted or created the actual sound of a Coke being opened, and we created a trading card, and we sold that for around 60,000 US dollars. And we're continuing to do stuff in that space that I think is really interesting. That's building community, that's creating connections between people in really fascinating and new ways.
So let's talk about NFTs for a bit. I think I'm more like your brother.
Sure.
I'm the process oriented. Don't get me wrong. I mean, my artists or my creative side is more on the music side. I love music. I like to mess around with music, etc. I love sports and I love technology, but very process driven and stuff. The NFTs are difficult for me. I mean, like, I'm the person logically that looks out and sees an NFT by Beeple every day is the first 5,000 days. I'm sure you're aware. Sells for $69 million. One of the most expensive works to be sold. Now I know it was kind of it was a way to set up other sales and stuff. I mean, in other words, I think they were doing it for a reason, not just for the art itself. But anyway, he displays the artwork in a digital museum in the metaverse. I mean, I'm like, wow. I'm. This is where, like I say, I'm not out in front of where I should be. First of all, I cannot put my head around $69 million for something that's digital in the metaverse where I got to go view it.
Sure.
Other people could copy it and take or print it out or something. Tell me about NFTs. Start basic, because I think our listeners will appreciate that, what they are and where you think they are today and where they're going.
Sure. So, NFT stands for non-fungible token. When something is fungible, it means that, they're interchangeable. So dollar bills, for example, are fungible. You have $1 bill, it's the same as every other dollar bill. It doesn't really matter. An NFT is a little bit more like a lottery ticket or a receipt. It has a specific value assigned to it, and it can point to a specific thing. So in the case of artwork, which is perhaps, the most famous use case of NFTs currently, we can say that if you own this digital token, this digital receipt, it also means that you own this specific animation or picture or song or, ticket, whatever you want to make it. I think from an artwork perspective, it's really fascinating. And I think that there are parallels in the world that you can look at that kind of make sense of it. Specifically within things like Venable goods, goods which people buy for the sake of status, to be able to say, I own this thing, and that makes me unique in terms of my ownership. I can, take a photograph of the Mona Lisa and I can, print it out and put it in my office, but I don't own it. I'm not going to fool anyone into thinking that I do own it. If you look at something like, a Richard Mille watch, which can go for $6 million for something that tells the time, it doesn't make sense on a rational, market-driven kind of level. But in terms of it being something that people want to own, that they want to have as a status symbol, it makes sense. That's at the very high end of the market. When we're talking about things like Beeples or CryptoPunks or Bored Ape Yacht Club, these different artworks and different projects that go for a lot of money, that Jimmy Kimmel own, that Paris Hilton own. But I think that kind of misses the wood for the trees, so to speak. I don't think we're going to be seeing as much of that kind of thing. I think where we will see a lot more use of NFTs and, digital tokens, is almost treating them more like wristbands to a concert, or loyalty cards for restaurants, or a lot more kind of functional, straightforward use cases, because there's that aspect of them as well that's kind of being ignored because of all the big news about all the other projects
Mhm.
involving them. So
So that,
mm,
by the way, for those CryptoPunk, I think that's what it's called. That was 11, over $11 million. But I know that, to
mm,
your point, this is why I wanted to have this conversation. I think those things grab the headlines,
yeah.
and you're saying, look, put those things aside. There are other use cases, everyday use cases that we will see not only now but in the future getting steam.
Mm.
You mentioned a few, but you can talk a few of those, what we can expect.
Sure, so I mean, Louis Vuitton has their own proprietary blockchain, which they use, to track the different materials and elements that make up their bags, to make sure that every element, every leather strap, every part of it, gets is an authentic piece of it. As another example, the work we're currently doing with Coca-Cola, we've released NFTs and digital tokens for International Hamburger Day, for Pride, for Friendship Day again. And our plan is to use those to grant access to projects like Coke Studios, which is Coca-Cola's global music platform, or to Coca-Cola Creations, which is our limited edition flavors and innovations, where we partner with, concerts and entertainment groups like Tomorrowland, or singers like Ava Max. And if you own one of these digital tokens, you can be rewarded in all these, these weird and wonderful ways. So there it is much more of a kind of access point than it is, a piece of high art, so to speak. Um, there are people doing experiments within literature, for example. Can you create an NFT of a book? Um, and those are succeeding to a greater or lesser extent. And so there's this kind of momentum that's built, that has been building, and there has been a bubble. But there's a lot of people who, despite the fact that there's been this bubble, they're continuing to make and create different things. The most ideal, idealistic way you can look at NFTs is that, specifically within the artwork space at least, is that they are accessible by everyone and ownable by one person, which is really a revolution for creative individuals who work within the digital space. Because for a long time, people have had to make their money from Spotify, or trying to sell hundreds of millions of tracks in order to make a few dollars. 3LAU, a musician, released his last album as a series of NFTs, where you could just get the album, or you could buy something more, where it came with, digital artwork, or it came with some kind of access or utility where you could, have a conversation with him. Or at the very high end, he would work with you, to create a track. And he sold that for a lot of money. And he's probably made way more money than he ever would have made, working through Spotify. So that's, one example of that being a very rewarding interaction for artists. There's a whole bunch of different projects, some of which are doing well, some of which, a lot of which are not doing well. But I think when we come out the other side, there's a lot of interesting stuff.
I know that you've got the Coke NFT. Can you say either more on that or other use cases that you've been involved with?
Sure. So the Coke stuff is really interesting. I'm obviously very biased because I'm very involved with it. I can't say too much about it, but I will say that we're using it to build a community around the essence of the brand, which is around real magic. And so as we go forward, I'm going to be really excited to be able to share a lot more around that. In terms of me personally, I have released a few different artworks as NFTs. I recently, and when I say recently, I mean a year ago, released an artwork called Fragments of Sappho. So, this kind of combines NFTs and artificial intelligence. So it's probably the right topic for this conversation. Sappho was this incredible poet from, 2000 years ago. She is so brilliant that even today we know about her. But unfortunately, all that's left of her poetry is literally fragments of scrolls, 2 or 3 sentences that you can find and read. And they're really moving, really beautiful sentences. There are 2 complete poems, and that's it. And what I worked out was that I could take the 2 complete poems and prompt GPT-3 with those 2 complete poems, and then feed it the fragments one by one and get it to write the rest of the poem, the missing parts of those fragments. And so GPT-3 completed these poems that have been lost, for 2,000 years. And that's the kind of thing that I love. Like I especially with artificial intelligence, with what I'm seeing from a creative standpoint. Like I honestly think it's like discovering the steam engine, where when you discover the steam engine, you don't immediately understand that it's going to lead to locomotives and it's going to lead to industrialization. But I see AI as a steam engine, and I think that we cannot predict the kind of things that we're going to be building with it. I think it's going to profoundly alter society and culture.
I've often thought about how it will bring back the humanities, but I got to tell you, most of the time that I have folks on here, either we're talking about the Terminator that's going to be created, or some other thing. We're talking about augmented intelligence, all good stuff, automation and different things like that. But I don't have enough people on to talk about the humanities, because I agree with you. I've done some studies on it as well, and there's a lot of opportunity. Now, I'm still trying to understand it all. Like on the poem you mentioned, do you see the GPT-3 finishing is accurate? I think you get where I'm going.
Absolutely. I mean, you don't know. She's been gone for 2,000 years. So we can't ask her. If we were to discover, a complete copy of the poem, we'd know. But I think what's fascinating is that it points towards a solution to something that would otherwise be impossible. I think, one of the things that I quite often think about when I see a lot of the artwork generated by artificial intelligence is that there's a resolution challenge where, it's kind of good. In some instances, it's incredible. But if you went through this journey with technology as well, I'm sure, where, the very first computers were monochrome, and then there was CGA and EGA graphics, and eventually you got a super VGA monitor and it looked beautiful. And, tablets were, a Kindle, and then they were full color, and then you started up with a Pebble Watch, and then you had a full color Apple Watch. And there's a similar kind of thing going on at a fantastic rate in terms of the accuracy, in terms of the fidelity of what the AI is generating. GPT-3 has been out for, I think, 2 or 3 years now. And whatever comes next is going to be even more profoundly accurate and human. So without, a copy of the poem, we don't know. But I will say that what GPT-3 wrote is really beautiful. I'll if you give me a minute, I'll actually pull up one of the completions.
So I'm sure the folks are listening, no different than me, are thinking, all right, AI, you got to teach it. It only knows what you teach. You're a poet. You could have finished that poem. What does GPT-3 offer that you could never do?
GPT-3 never gets tired. As a creative person, and I'm creative professionally. That's what I do day in, day out, is I come up with ideas. It is exhausting. It is exhausting to be a creative person. And you have, kind of moments when you're filled with potential and energy, and then you need a cup of coffee, and then you need to go outside and stare at a cloud for a while. And then you need to forget about it and go back. GPT-3 just keeps going. One of the most fundamental laws of creativity is that to come up with a good idea, you need to come up with a lot of ideas. And there is nothing on earth that can come up with more ideas than GPT-3 or artificial intelligence generally. And so I foresee the role of the creative person, the professional creative person, going forward as being very much that of a curator, where you understand what a good idea looks like, where you understand what it is you're trying to accomplish, and you work with augmented intelligence to kind of generate things until you get there and you can go, that's exactly what I'm looking for. And I think it's a collaborative process. I think there are people, and I think there's a lot of people who are very worried about it, where they think it's going to become this thing where you push a button, you go away, get a cup of coffee, and you come back and everything's done for you. It's a lot more like 3D printing, where you print something, there's bits of plastic, that are still stuck onto it. You've got to break things off, you've got to polish them, you've got to tweak them. But what you get out of it is incredibly rewarding, So So I think that's one of the really big things. I think there's other, there's other examples like the book What Makes Us Human. I came up with the idea for the book, and the idea wrote the book, you know. So it
So
actually
say
changed.
more on that. Tell me more on that, on how that plays out.
So I came up with the idea, of training an artificial intelligence on all these profound, spiritual, sacred, texts, or not training it, prompting it to be more technically accurate. And in having the conversation, I didn't write the output. I am a poet. I am an author, so I understand what good writing looks like. And so I could sit with it and go through everything it generated and go, that is beautiful, that is profound, that is moving, that is insightful, and cherry pick, and then go, and this is the conversation that I want to share with the world. And so that's fascinating. I mean, I think one of the really interesting use cases I can see for humanities-based artificial intelligence or media-based artificial intelligences, whether it's text or it's visualization technologies like DALL-E, is in building out very real metaverse experiences. So one of the big challenges when we speak about things like a metaverse or the metaverse is that these massive AAA games that get made require armies of animators, teams of writers to put them together. But if you can sit there and say, I would like to walk through an 18th century castle in Germany, or I would like to see, be in a forest on the edge of a galaxy and look out at the stars. We're not that far away from an AI being able to take that desire and manifest it in really profound and interesting ways. And that comes back to my point about resolution, where right now we're looking at images. Some technologies are animating, what DALL-E and Stable Diffusion are putting together. And I think we're probably, a few years away from that kind of experience.
Look, so we're on the metaverse now a little bit too, which is great. I wanted to talk about it. I get exactly what you're describing. I would love to go through, I've been to the Coliseum, but I'd love to go through it again, walk through all the different alleys that I didn't get to go through and all this stuff. That would be just so fantastic. Does it mean that I've lost it? That I don't want to be virtual and have a dinner with somebody virtually? I'd rather have a dinner with somebody face to face. Does that mean the times are passing me or what?
Yes. No, not entirely.
At least you're honest. I love it.
No. I mean, this is the thing. Within Vice, where I work, we work with a lot of young people, and their attitude towards technology and very deep digitally immersive experiences is very different. And even before the pandemic, there were a lot of young people who were using platforms like Fortnite or League of Legends or whatever they were playing, or just their Discord server, to connect with each other and to have these friendships and to have these profound experiences. And the pandemic compounded that in a really, really fundamental way. You have a lot of really young people who missed out on really key moments within their lives. And so they did their best to have them, and they had them in virtual spaces. And so they have this deep appreciation for what digital connection means, which I think might be a little bit lost on someone not within one of those generations. I'm also not a big fan of virtual reality, to be entirely honest with you. I find it very hard to drink a cup of coffee with an HTC Vive or an Oculus Rift on my head. I'm not sure I want to be having meetings in virtual reality. It's bad enough having meetings over Teams or Google Meet or whatever else it is.
That's what happened.
For where I am very bullish is augmented reality, where the reality that we experience is augmented. We have digital experiences that blend into the real world. We can take those glasses off. We can go and do something else. We can put them back on. And I think that is where the future probably lies in terms of, deep metaverse driven experiences. We know Apple is going to release something at some point soon. We know Meta's working on something similar. So I think those things are happening. And look, if people don't like it, it won't work. So we'll see what happens.
Well, look, I certainly believe the virtual world has its place. Don't get me wrong,
Sure.
and I also I'm really excited to see like some of the examples you provide in terms of being able to go look through some of the ancient castles, being able to watch a sports game on the 50-yard line or actually on the field itself on a regular basis or something. That would be very cool. It's just hanging out there for hours on end. But I think Zuckerberg's right. He's going all in. Hell, he's renamed the company.
Yeah. And I think we'll see if that was the right move or not. I agree with you completely. I don't want to spend hours, within that kind of a space. Like if I wanted to play soccer, I would go out onto a field and play soccer. I don't want to put on a headset, and connect up a whole bunch of stuff to do something I could be doing outside. If there is something that elevates those experiences, that creates connection where there otherwise couldn't be connection, where you get to sit on that 50-yard line with your friends from college that you haven't seen in 20 years, where AI creates an experience where you can speak to a player who's been dead for 20 years, and ask him his opinion on the game, then there are some really fascinating reasons to be within that space, and that's, look, I don't know, I'm putting those examples off the top of my head.
Podcast listeners, we're going to stop it there. We're going to continue with Iain Thomas next week. Next week, you'll hear about writing the book with AI. He'll talk about the meaning of life that AI gave him, bias, and look, we're going to do snippets from the book as well. Thank you. See you next week. Bye.